for obvious reasons. A new report by UN scientists has found cutting fossil fuel emissions alone won't be enough to stop global warming. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is warning that agriculture, wide-scale forestry and other land use now accounts for almost a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. Let's take you to Zurich, should we, where we can speak to, let me just grab my notes, Tom Crowther, who is the UN's Chief Scientific Advisor on the Trillion Tree campaign. He's also the founder of the Crowther Lab in Switzerland, which works to find scientific solutions to climate change and biodiversity loss. Hello to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme this afternoon. What have we learned? What are we continuing to learn about what needs to be done to try to save our planet?
So I think this report in particular is really useful because it sort of highlights the really front and center role that natural ecosystems and the sustainable management of those ecosystems plays in climate mitigation. We're gaining an increasing understanding of the quantitative scale of these ecosystems and how much carbon they store. And that's really highlighting that managing these ecosystems effectively is such an essential part of addressing climate change.
Which ecosystems are we talking about?
So anything that really stores carbon, we're talking forests store a huge amount of carbon, but so do wetlands and peatland soils store a huge amount of carbon as well. So if we can preserve these ecosystems, first, that is a critical step in, slowing down the emissions of carbon into the atmosphere. But you've also got to think these ecosystems absorb carbon at a constant rate. And so restoring and promoting these ecosystems can actually be a powerful solution to draw down the excess carbon that's already in the atmosphere now.
I learned recently that glaciers also store quite a lot of carbon, and as they melt, that is being released and potentially changing ecosystems in the Alps and other parts of the world. Difficult to do anything about that permafrost and glaciers at the moment in crevasses, but what about the lungs of the world in the form of forestation? We can do something about that.
You're exactly right. As we're losing glaciers, we're losing more and more carbon into the atmosphere. And the same goes for frozen soils. When those soils warm up, carbon gets emitted into the atmosphere faster and faster. So the first thing to do is to do everything that we can to keep those soils cool. And often the best way to do that is to simply allow those ecosystems to be preserved and to have vegetation on them, because plants actually really cool the surface of that soil. But as you mentioned, one of the really good things that we can have a really tangible impact on is forests. We can restore ecosystems, and we've recently found that there's room for about 0.9 billion hectares around the world. That's about the size of the United States, where we could actually restore forests to capture huge amounts of the excess carbon that's currently in the atmosphere.
That is certainly happening in places like Scotland, where we know people with lots of disposable income are trying to return parts of the country to their natural state. What else is being done?
So, based on reports like this and studies that we published a couple of months ago, we're starting to really see a huge global movement. There has been lots of investments from a few rich landowners around the world, restoring huge amounts of trees or soil peatlands. But what we really need is not just a few massive projects. We need thousands and thousands of small-scale projects all across the globe. And that's what we're starting to see piping up around the world. So it's a really simple, easy, low-cost solution that every single one of us can get involved with simply by donating to one of these thousands of projects that are already, doing great work in the fight against climate change.
You say that, Tom, but then, of course, we have to deal with situations like we find ourselves in with the United States, where the leader of the free world is a climate change denier. Let's describe him as that. If the US is not going to do anything about it and they pull out of the Paris Agreement, what does that mean for other? What's the point in a little country like ours trying to do its bit?
I mean, that's such a good point. Essentially, of course, we want political leaders to get involved in the climate crisis as much as possible to promote, effective and efficient use of fossil fuels so that we can reduce our emissions. But the nice thing about this effective land management is that it's a solution that doesn't require top-down decision from governments. It doesn't even require some genius scientific solution or breakthrough. We have the technology right now to have a huge impact simply by donating to restoration projects or even getting out there and doing it yourself. It can be a really enjoyable way to get involved in the climate crisis. And that tends to lead to more sustainable behavior in the rest of our lives as well. So it can be a really nice, low, easy bar for us to get involved.
And as individuals, do we all have to turn vegan?
Well, this report does highlight the really important role of meat eating. Of course, meat, the huge amount of meat consumption in the West is a major contributor to the amount of fossil fuel or the amount of land degradation that we see across the globe. But if the report also importantly doesn't say that we all need to immediately go vegan or start eating and wearing only hemp. Essentially, all we need to do, if every one of us tries to cut down a little bit, that's already having a huge impact. And if we can try and source our meat or our vegetables from local sources, the impact can be absolutely incredible. So as long as the places we're getting our food from can be increasingly sustainable and the soils that those plants and animals are growing on can be increasingly supported and sustainable, then we can have a really, really powerful impact on climate change.
Okay, good to talk to you, Tom. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Still to come on the Kay Burley Show.